Windows 1.0. Windows 1.0 doesn't have explorer.exe, it has MS-DOS Executive, which is used to launch programs and manage files. MS-DOS Executive isn't an exe file, it is stored under win100.bin. MS-DOS.exe is a stub for MS-DOS Executive that allows multiple instances of it to be launched. What happens if I rename MS-DOS.exe? Windows 1.0 still loads fine with MS-DOS.exe renamed because MS-DOS.exe is only a stub, and it is actually loading from win100.bin. What happens if I rename win100.bin? Windows won't load without win100.bin. Windows 2.0. Same as Windows 1.0. Windows 3.1. Windows 3.1 also doesn't have explorer.exe, it has Program Manager, which is used to launch programs. Program Manager is progman.exe, so what happens if I rename progman.exe? It won't let me rename it from within Windows, so I'll exit to DOS and rename the file from DOS. Windows won't load without Program Manager. What happens if I replace Program Manager with Notepad? Windows loads with Notepad instead of Program Manager. If I close Notepad, it exits Windows to DOS. What happens if I replace Program Manager with File Manager? Windows loads with File Manager instead of Program Manager. You can use File Manager to launch programs instead of using Program Manager. You can even launch the renamed Program Manager from File Manager. Even if you launch Program Manager from File Manager within Windows, closing Program Manager will still exit Windows to DOS. Closing File Manager, the program Windows was launched with, will also exit Windows to DOS. But closing any other program that was launched within Windows won't. Windows NT 3.1. Windows NT 3.1 also has Program Manager instead of explorer.exe. Like in Windows 3.1, Program Manager is progman.exe. So what happens if I rename progman.exe in Windows NT 3.1? The logon prompt still works. After logging on, it just shows the background, Program Manager doesn't come up. Ctrl-Alt-Delete still brings up Windows NT Security. Task list doesn't work without Program Manager. What happens if I replace Program Manager with Notepad? It opens Notepad instead of Program Manager. Task list still doesn't work. Closing Notepad doesn't prompt to log off or shut down. Notepad opens up every time I log on. What happens if I replace Program Manager with File Manager? It opens File Manager instead of Program Manager. You can launch programs with File Manager instead of Program Manager. You can launch the renamed Program Manager from File Manager. Program Manager still prompts to log off Windows when closed. Task list works now that Program Manager is running. Windows 95. Windows 95 is the first version of Windows to have explorer.exe. It won't let me rename it from within Windows, so I'll have to restart in MS-DOS mode and rename it from there. It still won't let me rename it, even in MS-DOS mode. I'll have to rename it from Linux. It comes up with a message saying error loading explorer.exe. You must reinstall Windows. Clicking OK shuts down. Pressing Ctrl-Alt-Delete still opens the Close Program dialog. That message runs under msgsrv.exe, so what happens if I end msgsrv.exe? That message goes away, and there is just a blank desktop with no taskbar or icons. Double-clicking on the blank desktop brings up tasks, which it doesn't normally when Explorer is running. From tasks you can run a new application. Tasks shows a list of running programs. Programs minimize into little bars which have restore and maximize buttons. What happens if I run the renamed Explorer from tasks? It opens a File Explorer window. What happens if I replace Explorer with Notepad? When I log on, Notepad comes up on a blank desktop with no taskbar or icons. You can launch programs using Notepad's open dialog. Closing Notepad doesn't prompt to log off or shut down or anything. Windows 98. Unlike in Windows 95, double-clicking the desktop when Explorer is not running does not open tasks. Ctrl-Alt-Delete still opens the Close Program dialog. What happens if I replace Explorer with Notepad? Like in Windows 95, when I log on, Notepad comes up on a blank desktop with no taskbar or icons. Like in Windows 95, you can launch programs using Notepad's open dialog. Windows Me. Windows Me doesn't have an option to restart in MS-DOS mode. Like in Windows 98, double-clicking the Explorer list desktop doesn't open tasks, but Ctrl-Alt-Delete still opens the Close Program dialog. Windows NT 4.0. Like in Windows 9X, it won't let me rename explorer.exe while Windows is running. I'll have to rename it from Linux instead. After I log on, it just shows the desktop background with no taskbar or icons. Double-clicking the desktop doesn't do anything. Ctrl-Alt-Delete still brings up Windows NT Security. Task Manager still works without Explorer. You can launch programs from Task Manager. What happens if I replace Explorer with Notepad? When I log on, Notepad opens up on a blank desktop with no taskbar or icons. Windows 2000. Like in Windows NT 4.0, it just shows the desktop background with no taskbar or icons. When there is no explorer.exe, the My Computer icon is a white page with a Windows logo in it. What happens if I replace Explorer with Notepad? Like in Windows NT 4.0, Notepad opens up on a blank desktop with no taskbar or icons. The My Computer icon is the Notepad icon. Windows XP. In Windows XP, before you can rename a system file, you need to delete its backup from the DLL cache folder. DLL cache is a system folder, so I'll need to show protected operating system files. It takes longer than normal to log on. Once it does log on, it just shows the desktop background with no taskbar or icons. Ctrl-Alt-Delete still opens Task Manager. You can launch programs using Task Manager. Programs minimize into little bars which have restore and maximize buttons. This is different to what happens if you end Explorer. If you end Explorer in Windows XP, programs disappear when minimized. The My Computer icon doesn't show correctly without explorer.exe. What happens if I replace Explorer with Notepad? It still takes longer than normal to log on. Once it does log on, Notepad opens up on top of the desktop background with no taskbar or icons. Replacing explorer.exe with notepad.exe has replaced the My Computer icon with the Notepad icon. What happens if I disable the welcome screen? When using the classic logon prompt, it just logs on quickly like normal. Windows Vista. Like in Windows XP, it takes longer than normal to log on. Once it does log on, it shows a black background with no taskbar, icons, or sidebar. This is different to what happens if you end Explorer. If you end Explorer, it still shows the desktop background and the sidebar. Ctrl-Alt-Delete still brings up security options. You can launch programs using Task Manager. Classic Alt-Tab Switcher. This is what the Alt-Tab Switcher normally looks like in Windows Vista. Win+Tab still does 3D window fly-through. Running sidebar from Task Manager brings up the sidebar. Unlike in Windows XP, running the renamed Explorer doesn't do anything. What happens if I replace Explorer with Notepad? Unlike in Windows XP, Notepad doesn't open up after logging on. Windows 7. Same as Windows Vista. Windows 8. Like in Windows XP, Vista, and 7, it takes longer than normal to log on. Like in Windows Vista and 7, it shows a black background when I log on after having renamed Explorer. If you end Explorer while it is running, the background goes the accent color. You can run new desktop apps from Task Manager, but you can't run Metro apps without Explorer. Hot corners don't work without Explorer. Classic Alt-Tab Switcher. Like in Windows Vista and 7, running the renamed Explorer doesn't do anything. Like in Windows Vista and 7, replacing Explorer with Notepad doesn't make Notepad open up when I log on. Windows 8.1. Same as Windows 8. Windows 10. Like in Windows Vista, 7, 8, and 8.1, it shows a black background when I log on after having renamed Explorer. You can run new classic apps from Task Manager, but you can't run UWP apps without Explorer. Classic Alt-Tab Switcher. Win+Tab doesn't bring up Task View like it normally does when Explorer is running. Like in Windows Vista, 7, 8, and 8.1, replacing Explorer with Notepad doesn't make Notepad open up when I log on. Running the renamed Explorer doesn't do anything. Windows 11. Same as Windows 10. End of video.